Hello, this is Dr. Grande. In today's video, I'll be going over 7 myths about schizoid personality disorder. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. That way you won't miss anything new. Now, we talk about schizoid personality disorder. We're talking about a cluster A personality disorder in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So this is in the same cluster as schizotypal personality disorder and paranoid personality disorder. And with schizoid personality disorder, we see a pattern of detachment, and we see a restricted range of the expression of emotions. Oftentimes, individuals with schizoid personality disorder are referred to as being a loner. Now, we see specific symptoms with schizoid personality disorder, like not having close friends, not having an interest in close relationships, being solitary, being indifferent to praise or criticism, and having a cold demeanor. Now, in terms of the myths about schizoid personality disorder, let's get started with myth number 1. Myth number 1 is that schizoid personality disorder is the same thing as schizophrenia. I've heard a few different versions of this myth. So there's this version, and there's also this version where schizoid personality disorder is a variant of schizophrenia, and another myth where schizoid personality disorder is an indicator that somebody will develop schizophrenia. So really all 3 myths have this link between schizoid personality disorder and schizophrenia. And it's understandable how this myth came into being, how this misconception exists. The terms seem similar, schizoid and schizophrenia, and there is an overlap in some of the symptoms. But schizophrenia is a distinct illness that has persistent psychotic symptoms, and we don't see that with schizoid personality disorder. Also, schizoid personality disorder is a personality disorder. It's not a variant of schizophrenia, although there are some theories that schizophrenia runs on a spectrum and schizoid may be on one end of that spectrum. Now, in terms of it leading to schizophrenia, sometimes individuals who will eventually be diagnosed with schizophrenia are first diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder. Schizoid personality disorder, though, doesn't lead to schizophrenia. Probably the same underlying factors that cause schizophrenia lead to schizoid personality disorder. That explains why a certain individual may develop schizoid personality disorder and then later on develop schizophrenia. Myth number 2 is that there's an increased risk of violence with schizoid personality disorder. And we hear this myth about a number of the personality disorders and a number of mental disorders in general. There's no evidence to suggest that there's a greater risk of violence with schizoid personality disorder than an individual who doesn't have schizoid personality disorder. There's no additional risk with that disorder. I think the reason this misconception exists is because people confuse schizoid personality disorder with antisocial personality disorder. And antisocial personality disorder does have an increased risk of violence associated with it, but schizoid personality disorder is more asocial than it is antisocial. I think another reason this misconception exists is that relationship I talked about before with schizophrenia, and sometimes we do see an increased risk of violence with schizophrenia, particularly when psychotic symptoms are present. So again, that leads to this confusion around schizoid personality disorder. Myth number 3 is that individuals with schizoid personality disorder lack emotion. Now, there certainly is, in many cases, a constriction of emotion. Emotion is restricted, but the challenge here with schizoid personality disorder, the difficulty is really in expressing emotions, not necessarily in having emotions. Now, there are fewer stronger emotions reported with individuals who have schizoid personality disorder, but that's not the same thing as lacking emotion. Myth number 4 is that individuals with schizoid personality disorder can't work, that they have impaired vocational functioning. There is some impairment, particularly with jobs related to interpersonal relationships, jobs that involve a lot of social interaction. But in terms of jobs that are solitary, individuals with schizoid personality disorder tend to do fairly well in those jobs, and even jobs that have some limited interaction with other people. So I think that really this isn't about not being able to work, it's about having a challenge in certain types of work settings. Myth number 5 is that individuals with schizoid personality disorder have frequent psychosis. Again, this really goes back to myth number 1 with that confusion with schizophrenia. With schizophrenia, we would see persistent psychosis. With schizoid personality disorder, we would see sometimes brief psychosis. According to the DSM, the psychosis would be minutes and sometimes hours, but it's not persistent like we would expect to see with schizophrenia. Myth number 6 is that schizoid personality disorder doesn't co-occur with other personality disorders. And I think that when we look at a lot of the other personality disorders, we see a relational component to them. Antisocial, narcissistic, borderline, histrionic, dependent, paranoid, all have these relational aspects. And schizoid personality disorder really doesn't. There's a lack of interest in developing close relationships. So it seems like somebody couldn't have schizoid personality disorder and a number of those other personality disorders. But actually schizoid personality disorder does tend to be comorbid with schizotypal, paranoid, and avoidant personality disorder. So schizotypal and paranoid, of course, the other two personality disorders from cluster A, and avoidant personality disorder, a personality disorder from cluster C. Myth number 7 is that individuals with schizoid personality disorder are paranoid. And really this isn't a symptom we typically see with schizoid personality disorder. If an individual with this disorder has paranoia, the likely explanation is comorbidity. And again, because schizoid personality disorder is comorbid with schizotypal and paranoid personality disorders, and both of those personalities of course have a paranoid component, it's easy to see how this myth continues. Another reason I think this myth continues is because believing that somebody with schizoid personality disorder has paranoia explains why they have low interest in social situations. So individuals believe that somebody with schizoid personality disorder chooses to not interact with other people because they're afraid of people. But that's actually not the reason why. The reason why is a lack of interest. So it's a lot different really than paranoid and schizotypal personality disorders in that way. I hope you found this description of 7 myths about schizoid personality disorder to be interesting. Thanks for watching.